Yesterday was a big day at the U.S. Supreme Court. Today's another big day. You've got some rulings expected as they wrap up releasing the rulings from their fall hearings they held. Everything from whether or not postal workers can be forced to work on Sundays if they have religious convictions, to a landmark decision yesterday about affirmative action in colleges and universities, essentially saying you can't use race as a basis for letting someone into a university or a college. So let's get to that now, because after the ruling came out of the U.S. Supreme Court, you had lawmakers in Illinois sound off on that decision. And a lot of statements coming out about this, including from the Illinois Board of Higher Education. But the decision in the case Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus President and Fellows of Harvard College came down by a 6-3 vote. John Roberts, the Chief Justice for the U.S. Supreme Court, in part of his opinion, he said a benefit to students who overcame racial discrimination, for example, must be tied to the student's courage and determination, or a benefit to a student whose heritage or culture motivated him or her to assume a leadership role or attain a particular goal must be tied to that student's unique ability to contribute to the university. In other words, the student must be treated based on his or her experience as an individual, not based on race. And that's according to Chief Justice Roberts. But as the decision was released, you had the Illinois Board of Higher Education. That's the state government board that evaluates higher education and sets policies and whatnot, and also deals with grants for colleges and universities across the state. They released a statement saying that the outcome is a bad outcome, and they condemned the ruling. They say the ruling's an attack on people of color, particularly black people, who face discrimination through multiple facets of American society. Affirmative action already was not a robust solution. It was merely a tool intended to chip away at an enormous obstacle. It's disheartening to know that there are people intent on stifling racial equity at a time when we should be working together to break down barriers, because this is the right thing to do, they said. So again, you've got an interesting dynamic here. The Supreme Court essentially said you can't be racist. You can't use race as a factor in letting people into college or universities, essentially saying affirmative action is wrong. And that's an issue that bumps up against the 14th Amendment. And we've heard these arguments for years, but the affirmative action laws have been in place since the early 60s. And the U.S. Supreme Court, this particular court, saying that that using of basis of race is unconstitutional. So you have the reactions coming in, including from Governor J.B. Pritzker, who posted on Twitter that he's opposed to this decision. And he says the decision only sets us back. But he also goes on to say that here in the land of Lincoln and the land of Obama, he says, we will continue to uplift our students of color, promoting inclusion and expanding access through record levels of funding for higher education institutions and our MAP grant programs, so that every student has the opportunity to get a degree. To students of color throughout the land of Lincoln and the entire United States, the governor says, you belong in our institutions, and no archaic ruling will ever change that. So again, that's the statement from Governor J.B. Pritzker. But you had people like State Representative Brad Halbrook release statements saying that this is a good decision. The Republican from Shelbyville, he shared his statements with my colleague Andrew Hensel, and he said that the ruling's about fairness. Students deserve equal access and equal opportunity. Disregarding applicants simply on the basis of race is wrong, Halbrook said. It's in these unfair policies it's time that they were rescinded. The Supreme Court ruling was the right one today. But again, that's a Republican perspective. What about State Representative LaShawn Ford? He also sounded off on this and shared his comments and ultimately said that he feels that this sets the state back. And it's something that continues to be an issue when it comes to race relations. And you hear terms like systemic racism, for instance. That's something that people say is still very much much prevalent in society. But State Representative LaShawn Ford saying ultimately that it was a disappointing day. Here's some of what he had to say.
And so what we see now is the Supreme Court actually turning back the hands of time with some of the fights and gains that this country have made. And so I think that elections have consequences, and the conservative bench will continue down the path of reversing some of the gains that we've made.
Republican State Representative Charlie Meyer, he had a different take, and he says that many students were denied admission because of their race in colleges. Here's some of what Charlie Meyer had to say in reaction to what we saw happen out of the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday on affirmative action.
Today's overturning of the ruling is justifiable. It's gotten to the point that many students here that are white no longer can get into college.
So obviously, a lot of back and forth, but the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling changing how universities can use race or not when it comes to admissions. So, the speculation is a lot of these universities are going to find other avenues, and there surely are other avenues that may be tested in court or may not be. Those avenues could be, we're going to look at areas that were disproportionately impacted by certain policies, and people coming from those zip codes could possibly have better access to the universities and colleges, and that may be able to bring about naturally a level of diversity. But the idea really boils down to the Supreme Court saying colleges and universities can't be racist and determining race as a factor for students to get into college. So interesting to hear that argument. There's still a lot of rulings that are expected today, including a ruling on student loans forgiveness that President Joe Biden's trying to implement, and several others. So a lot of key decisions still have yet to be released from the U.S. Supreme Court.